Hi everyone and welcome to Despair Repair. In this video we'll be talking about how to drive a car that has a bad starter. So what does a bad starter mean? You try to turn the ignition key to crank the engine and you either get nothing, you may get a clicking sound, you may get a screeching sound, all in all the engine will not start. Well, in this case, of course, the proper thing to do would be to visit a mechanic or to make the repair yourself and call it a day. That's the solution of the problem. But what if you can't do that for certain reasons, like the financial situation is not that good, you may not have time enough to do it, you may have to wait for a spare part for your car a long time. In those situations, the car is practically useless and you're in big trouble if you depend on the car. Well, in this video we'll show you a couple of things you can do to put the car back in motion, so to say, and to make it useful again until you solve the starter problem. So stay tuned.
DespairRepair.com. Be sure to visit us at our website DespairRepair.com, where you can find more useful car and driving tips.
Now, before we start, I would just like to warn about a couple of things regarding what we're going to show you in this video. First of all, the video is made for cars with manual transmission, also known as stick shifts. So if you drive a car with automatic transmission, you can't do any of this and you can pretty much stop watching this video. Second, you'll have to pay attention to what kind of damage happened to the starter. Mainly, is it left engaged with the engine? Now, I don't know how much you know about car mechanics and electrics, but the starter has a pinion called a bendix that engages with the flywheel, turns the flywheel, cranks the engine, and so on. If this remains engaged for some reasons, like a bad solenoid, a bad fork, or something like that, you can't drive the car. You can't do any of this because you may further damage the starter, damage the flywheel, damage something else on the car, even damage the transmission housing, and those are big and expensive repairs. So don't do that. The best situation is when the brushes are bad, there's a faulty solenoid, there are faulty bushings, and the starter can't engage at all and it just sits dormant, so to say. In that case, it is just an appliance bolted to the transmission and there are no problems. You can continue driving the car forever, so to say. Try not to, in this period, while you're driving the car with a bad starter, try not to use the starter at all. Why am I saying this? Well, there are a lot of drivers out there who are persistent in turning the ignition key, trying, maybe one more time, it will start this time, and so on, and they can cause problems this way. During this period, while you're gonna drive the car, again, it may be days, even weeks or months, during this time, forget about turning the ignition key. Simply turn it just before cranking and leave it that way. That is best to avoid any kind of problems. Also, if you notice any kind of physical damage to the starter, like in the case we've mentioned, when it's left engaged, the starter housing may break, and in this case the starter may completely separate from the transmission housing, believe it or not. I've seen even cases where the starter completely falls out of the engine bay and onto the road. These are rare cases, but they do happen. You can easily recognize it as if you were to touch the starter, it would wiggle, and be loose, despite the fact that it's still bolted to the engine. But again, this is rare, but it's worth the check. In this case, absolutely do not drive the car, okay, to avoid causing serious damage. Now the most important part, and that is, when you turn on the ignition or try to crank the engine, if you notice any traces of smoke, any traces of a burning smell, do not drive the car. The best thing to do in that case is to take off the minus battery clamp and just let the car sit until you solve the problem. In certain cases, like when the starter has been heavily used, heavily cranked, it can cause certain problems that can then lead to causing a fire, God forbid. So to avoid all of this, if you notice any traces of smoke, any weird smell of burning or something like that, take off the minus battery clamp and do not drive the car. Now the first thing you must do is to be sure that the starter is actually the problem. So the basic sort of drill would be to first check the battery. Okay, check if the clamps are tight enough, if everything is clean, tightened, and that everything is okay. Make sure that the battery is in good condition, that it isn't expired, and that the battery isn't causing the problem. We made a specific video about this, how to diagnose a starter problem properly. I'll leave a link in the corner of this video or in the video description, so if you have problems with this, that video should help solve it. Another thing that I would advise for you to do is to take a look at the starter and see that all the connections are in place. So in case of the Skoda, it's very well done. There are rarely any problems regarding this. Just in case, check that there isn't a broken cable, that something isn't torn off, physically damaged regarding the connections to the starter and the starter solenoid. Also check for any other kinds of problems with the ground connections, or in general any other problems that can be causing the issue of the car not starting, not cranking, but it's not the starter. Now, why is it very important to make a proper diagnosis of the problem? Well, the next few steps we're going to show you are they're not that complicated to do, but they are sort of an ordeal, you know, especially if you're going to use the car for the next couple of days or even months, you know. My point on this part, lots of times a cracked cable, a loose battery clamp, a filthy battery clamp, or some of those simple things to fix can cause you to do what we're going to show you now, and you don't have to do it at all. So always first check what the problem is and continue with the tips we're going to show you if you're 100% certain that the starter is the problem. Now, the first thing you're gonna have to do on a regular basis whenever you want to start the car is to bump start the car. So not jump start, but bump start the car. What does this mean? Well, you'll be essentially using the force of the wheels, the axle, the transmission, and everything else to rotate the pistons inside the engine and start the engine. So instead of the starter doing that, you'll use the motion of the car to start the engine. I hope this doesn't sound too complicated, but you know, that's the basic principle. You're doing things essentially in reverse. Now, regarding bump starting, what can I say? For most drivers, it's an experience that when they see what they have to do, they don't want to do it. It's pretty traumatic for them. But trust me, there's nothing to be afraid, you know, especially if you've never done this before. It's not that complicated. All it takes is a bit of attention, and it's even better if you exactly know what you're doing, you know, so how the whole principle works. I'll try to explain it shortly, so, you know, I hope this helps. Now, the first thing you'll have to do is to find someone that will either tow you or push the car. The point is to gain speed and momentum so that the force of the rotating wheels can in fact start the engine. The first thing you have to do is to turn on the ignition key, okay, like this, and turn it to the position, I don't know how it's called on your car, but this is the position just before cranking. So do not engage the starter or try to crank the engine, just turn on the ignition. Next, you'll have to put the car into third gear. So press the clutch and put the car into third gear. On this part, there are lots of people who say to put it in second gear, but I would advise to put it in third gear. There is, at least in my opinion, much less pressure on the engine. And if the engine has good compression, it will start this way also, and there will be less possibility of damaging the engine because the timing belt may skip and so on. Now that this is engaged, be sure to press the clutch fully. I'm sorry for the imitation Crocs. I'm having some knee problems and some swollen ankles, so I beg your pardon. Anyway, keep the clutch depressed. And this is the starting position for the beginning of bump starting. Now, after this, give a signal to someone who's towing you or the people that are pushing you to begin the towing or pushing. And wait for the car to gain speed and gain momentum. You should go about, I don't know, this is a rough estimate, but about 10 kilometers an hour should be enough if the engine is good and it starts properly. So Now you're in motion, the car is moving, you will start, the car has gained speed, slowly release the clutch like this, and at this moment you will sense the car jumping and you will hear the engine wanting to start, okay? So you don't have to release the clutch totally, just release it until the engine starts. Now comes the tricky part. When the engine starts, immediately press the clutch and press the brake. Press the brake pedal so the car can stop as soon as possible. Once the engine is started, put the gear into neutral, pull the handbrake, and after that, release the clutch and release the brake pedal. So there you have it. At first it may seem complicated, but in fact it's very easy to do. The most important thing is that since lots of times someone will be towing you, you won't find enough people to push you on the parking lot or somewhere else in your yard, and it's much more convenient to tow you. The most important thing when bump starting is to remember not to hit the person in front of you. The first condition for this is not to panic, okay? Sometimes when bump starting the car, you'll have to release the clutch several times. You know, the engine will not start immediately, so you're gonna have to press the clutch, release it, the car won't start, press it again, release it, and you know, there will be a lot of bumping and everything else. But the main thing is not to panic. You should listen to the engine and focus on the car in front of you so you can stop the car on time. One more thing. When you're towing, make sure that you either have a tow bar, so a bar that prevents you from crashing into the car in front of you, or if you have a towing rope, make sure to use the handbrake when slowing down the car. So for instance, if the car will not start immediately, you know, and the person has to tow you for, let's say, 100 meters, then in that case use the handbrake to slow down the car, because the engine is not working and the brake pedal will not work when you press it. So have this always in mind. Do not panic. Always be aware of what you're doing, and the main thing is to stay safe and to not damage your car or the car that's towing you. Now that you've started the engine, you can essentially drive the car normally, again provided that the starter does not cause further problems, does not interfere with the engine, is it engaged with the flywheel and everything else. There are a couple of things you should always have in mind when driving like this. The first thing is that every time you stop somewhere, you should not turn off the engine. So you have to let the engine run. Every time you turn off the engine, you're gonna go through the whole bump starting procedure once more, you know, and that's very hard to do, since every time you're gonna have to find someone who's gonna tow you, who's gonna push you, and that's pretty hard to do, you know. People are reluctant to tow and to help you because they're afraid for their car and their safety. So it would be very good if you have any errands, jobs in town, or anything else, to plan them in a way that you can do it to not turn off the engine. If you have to go to the market, to the shop, or anything else, you know, try to plan it in some way that you can leave the engine turned on. I'm sorry to say, but that's the only way to avoid asking always someone to tow you and to push you. Another thing that you must have in mind is the way you drive. A manual transmission, a stick shift. For instance, one of the worst things that can happen to you is to be stuck in heavy traffic, in a big queue, in a big line, and that you move forward very slowly. In these cases, oftentimes you can release the clutch earlier and the engine can cut off, okay? The engine will bog down and cut off, and then in the middle of traffic, you'll be stuck with a car that can't start. And that's a big problem. You can cause a traffic jam, you can cause a problem, perhaps get a fine or something like that. So have this in mind, be very careful when you're driving with a bad starter. So, dear viewer, that's it for this time. The biggest problem with all of this for most drivers would be the bump starting procedure, but once you get the hang of it, once you go through the whole thing, I think that you'll see that it's not that complicated. Besides this, again, I must mention, do all of this if there is reason for it, okay? If you're really in a tight spot, if you're really in a bad situation, then do this. Again, this is an improvisation. The right thing to do is to make the repair as soon as possible, you know. Also, and I must mention this again and in bolded letters, if you see that the starter problem can cause further damage to the engine, to the transmission, to the flywheel, to the car's electrics and electronics, simply you can't use the car. Face that fact and try to find another solution, because if you're persistent and you try to do this, you may cause bigger damage. It may cost you not a couple of €100, but a couple of €1,000, and who wants to do that? So just be aware of this fact and simply use the public transportation, use the bicycle, pay someone to drive you around. It's much cheaper than to pay a bigger car damage. That's it for this time. Please like and subscribe. It's a huge help for what we're doing. If you find the time, watch our other videos that are related to cars, car maintenance, driving, and I think you'll find them useful. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you hopefully in the next video.